Our next speaker are coming from very far. Maria Idalia Garcia Aguilar is from the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico, and she will be assisted by Carlos Ricardo Vargas Medina, which you already can see on my left-hand side. Maria Idalia has a PhD in scientific documentation from the University of Granada. She's specialized in environmental and patrimonial interpretation and in cultural policies and cultural management. She's a researcher at the Library Science and Information Research Institute, and she writes about bibliographic heritage in Mexico and written culture in colonial Mexico. Ricardo is a specialist in automation, which you might have suspected already. So, Idalia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Robert. Before I starting, we want to say that I really appreciate this opportunity to expose a part of our research because it's a work in progress. Thank you, Goran. For many years, we have looked for a new historical evidence of private libraries in colonial Mexico. This issue has not generated research interest because it was believed that all the collections were poor and devotional. Also, our knowledge of the bibliographical past was based in some works, as Fernández del Castillo, O'Gorman, Leonard, or Medina. For that reason, at the beginning of the research, we considered that there was no more evidence than the collection reported in the past, but eventually we found 124 new testimonies of libraries. The largest is the collection of the lawyer Luis de Mendoza. Of those libraries, we could only work with a part of them because are the ones that have the complete list of the books. Most of them were elaborated in the 18th century. The documents are in post-mortem inventory, and this evidence showed us two important things. First of all, the list of books were the result of an inquisitorial procedure implemented since 1632, and it had not been identified and described. Now, we understand how all the process works and what was the impact of the Inquisition on the characteristics of these records. On the other hand, we found the existence of a circulation of a significant number of used books at the time of the Enlightenment. An important part of these memorias, as they were called in their time, had more information than we believed. For example, place of printing, years, book binding, material condition, and price. This information offers us a possibility to study the second-hand book market because those books were always sold in public auction. Only a few libraries were donated to a member of a family, as is the case of Cayetano Torres Library, or an institution like the case of Carlos de Sigüenza y Góngora. This cultural practice explained the interest of inquisitorial activities to control the circulation of books because some of them could be prohibited. This inquisitorial process was the last control of books in the territory. For this presentation, we focus our attention in price and their connection with other elements on the market, but we pay attention in material conditions to explain the book market of used books. These conditions including the book being broken, old, moth-eaten, or not having a title page or a first part. On the screen, you can see one of these records. At the moment, we have only been working with 13 memorias. From this sample, we identified 3,413 editions produced from the 15th century to the 18th among 3,557 records. The information of every inventory was processed in a bibliographical database because the most important objective was the identification of editions in circulation during this period. All the information was worked in a specific bibliographic program, as COA, in order to analyze it and combine some specific data with others. COA is a first open source created in 2001 and is the software that solves the design to institutional catalogs in an emerging countries like Mexico. COA was born in New Zealand in the Haueroa Library Trust. The software substitutes the UNESCO ISIS program that had been in use for more than 2 decades and is the base of important efforts as the Real Library of Spain. In this software, every edition was identified a national catalog from other countries, not Mexican catalogs. Why? because cataloging in our country does not consider important to identify the code for every record, and this record doesn't have relation with certain object. You can ask for a banana and obtain to an apple. It's an effect of Mexican magic. For that, we cannot collect information from this resource because it's not reliable. Believe it or not, our National Library still has the 50% of rare books collection without identification, and is the same problem in another libraries. Today, we have more instruments to identify all editions. Thanks to this, we have found many editions registered in our source. Mexico has an enormous problem in the cataloging of rare books. In consequence, we don't trust in the institutional information. For that reason, we prefer to use other catalogs that have been validated in other projects. It's very interesting that of the majority of the editions registered in the inventories, at least one copy remains. Also, for our surprise, we found colonial editions that we didn't have any notice, but sadly, those books have disappeared. We use foreign catalogs to identify editions produced in Europe and national catalogs to detect books produced in colonial Mexico. At this moment, we obtained 2,317 records from Spain, 816 from Italy, 116 from Mexico, another source 120. As a result of the research, we find more titles available than different editions of the same title. For example, on the screen you can see the 5 owners of the same Rivadeneira edition. We've had only 5 cases. Four of them had prices, as you see. We find these cases are exceptional in the sample. That information proves a great impact of the circulation of different books in a market well supplied by the booksellers who belong to a European network and sold the book in local markets. One group of these books always transmitted between generations, including certain copies of Incunabula. It's interesting because the majority of those books were from 17th century, and the booksellers of the same period had in offer more contemporary edition of their time and less old edition. At this moment, we are working with some lists of booksellers of the same century to connect the offer to the demand, because they supply this specific market. Of course, for this part of the research, the first step was to separate the edition between those that have a price and the group that hasn't. As you can see on the graph, they represent 40.5% of the sample. All prices are expressed in pesos and reales, and these are not always the same for the same edition. As I mentioned, we found 1,440 prices established, and most of them are linked with one person. Therefore, it was not the real price of purchase, because they were only for public auction. It's a merchandise price between the booksellers and the buyers. The real cost of the book was the one that owners annotated in their books. We can find this information annotated in certain copies, me costó 3 pesos. And we also compiled this annotation to understand how the economic values of books in colonial Mexico works. We don't know what the cost of new edition was, because we cannot find much evidence about that. On the screen, you can see an unique case, the list of price of one store. We don't know the name of the bookseller, but it's only useful in comparative terms. For example, the Oficio Príncipes of Bellarmino cost 5.6 reales, but in our information, we have an edition of 1619 that was a price in 2 reales. Both of them were praise of the 18th century. We believe that the one price could be for a contemporary edition, a new edition, and the other for a used book. An important problem has been to establish what aspects were considered to appraise the object. The inventories had 2 specific aspects: material conditions and book vintage. However, we cannot precise if one of these characteristics affected the price more of it is because the object was new or used. That is the question, because we only have a group of documents with this information. We don't forget many evidence, only contain author and title or one of them. The graph shows that there are more books in bad condition, for example, perished or incomplete. As you can see on the screen, the characteristics seem to indicate that the material condition of the book determines its appraisal. Trunco y roto. In other cases, for example, the books with a specific characteristic like silver decoration don't have an economic estimation. It is possible that the bookseller wanted to negotiate a better price with this kind of books. On the other hand, the most expensive book that we found, 70 pesos, only had gold decoration on the foredge. This information refutes the historical interpretation that established that all these books in colonial time were expensive and only certain people could buy them. Because our information shows that some books had the same price as other manufactured products like a silver fork or a dog. In other words, in New Spain, there were books for all kinds of consumers. The future has a big expectation on this matter. As I have mentioned before, we only work with some testimonies for this presentation. There are more to study and analyze. All these documents contain 30,119 records. Sadly, we only have 10% for all information. This information will give us a different but complementary perspective of the subject. For instance, on the screen we only distinguish the 5 most expensive books and the 5 most is the other. The 5 most expensive book and the 5 most cheaper of 1,440. For that reason, we created a group of work and now we are more than 10 persons interested in this evidence. Each one works with some library for their personal interest, but they must contribute with the bibliographical information for the group. In the group of documents, there are 3 documents of booksellers with their personal libraries and their bookstore. An immense work is still to be done, but there is no rush. Finally, we want to highlight that this information contributes the necessary evidence to establish the importance of colonial production in the book market. As you see on the screen, Mexico is in the same place that important cities of production in Europe. It's the first evidence that we have about the impact of local productions. It's the first time that we have numbers. Thank you for your attention.